it takes two to tango. I mean, you can only borrow if somebody is saving. There has to be a lender on the other side of that transaction. There has to be something in it for the lender. You have to have higher interest rates. The problem is the banks are just getting money from the Federal Reserve and turning around and buying treasuries with it. That's not going to grow the economy. That's going to grow the government. But meanwhile, these monetary policies are stifling the savings that we need to grow the economy.
Mr. Lindsay, Mr. Schiff.
Yeah, well, ideally, you would abolish the corporate tax completely. I mean, corporations don't pay the taxes. Their shareholders pay the taxes. So tax them at the shareholder level. The employees pay the taxes when they get paid. But again, ideally, we'd have no income tax. We'd have no payroll tax. If the Federal Government needs revenue, let it raise it through a national sales tax. It would be much more conducive to tax people when they spend their wealth, not when they accumulate it.
I agree with all that.
The argument is always that, well, if we only tax spending, the rich don't spend all their money. Precisely. The money they don't spend is what grows the economy. That's what produces the jobs. If they're not spending the money, it's benefiting everybody but the rich. The rich enjoy their wealth when they spend it, and so that's a much better time to tax it. But as far as your budget plan, I think Congress is much underestimating how much time we have to deal with this crisis. I think there is a sovereign debt crisis and a currency crisis coming to this country soon, maybe even before the next election, and that will be far more catastrophic to our economy than what happened in 2008.
Well said. I mean, I couldn't. The window of time to fix this is closing very rapidly, and it just underscores how serious it is, Mr.
Well, most top economists are saying that the President's American Jobs Act will boost the economy and create jobs. And Mark Zandi, chief economist for Moody's Analytics, is forecasting a 1.9 million job boost and a 2% lift for GDP if the President's package is passed as proposed. This 2% tax cut, Mr. Schiff, you're in agreement with that payroll?
No.
You're in disagreement with that?
I think the deficits that will be created to finance that tax cut will do more damage to undermine this economy and destroy jobs than any benefit we will get from the extra income being spent. The problem is the damage that the government does to the economy is not limited to taxation. It's spending. It's what the government is spending that is damaging the economy. And so if we run deficits instead of taxes, we actually do more damage. Deficit spending is more detrimental to the economy than taxation.
I got you.
But what we need to do is dramatically reduce government spending. That is the only stimulus that will work.
Well, we'll disagree on that. I think we need to do both. I don't think that there's any member of Congress that does not believe that we need to do both. Mr. Boucher, what's your opinion on that?
It's hard to imagine how spending, that right now when interest rates are at historic lows, when people still want to buy U.S. Treasuries, when we have this massive unmet need in terms of both infrastructure, but all of the massive layoffs that have happened in education around America because of the state and local budget crunches, that using government dollars right now for those, it is hard to understand how that is not easy for us to do because we can afford it, and B, that does not help our economy. Having children in school rooms in places across the country with 40 children is not good for America's future. It's not good for America's workforce. We can do something to fix that. We can borrow at historic low rates, and we can pay it back as the economy gets back on track. And I'd like to take issue with one thing that Mr. Schiff said earlier, which is that America can't afford it. America remains one of the richest countries on the planet. To say that we cannot afford to make these investments right now when our economy needs it most and get 14 million people back to work is quite frankly absurd. We can afford it. It's just how we're using our resources.
We can afford it. And the problem is interest rates are low now. They're not going to stay low. We've got a $15 trillion national debt financed with Treasury bills. It's the same mistake that people made who were taking out subprime mortgages. What's going to happen when rates are at 5% or 10%? What's going to happen when interest on the national debt consumes 100% of federal tax receipts? That can happen in just a few years. Interest rates got to 20% in 1980. What happens if they go there again?
Madam Chair, I see my time is up, but I just want to need 15 seconds to say this. One of the things that we've got to do, we have got to invest in our people. If you got kids, one of the greatest threats to our national security is our failure to properly educate every single one of our children. That's the greatest threat. And if we have to spend now to educate our children so that they can take over this world, innovate, create jobs, and do the right thing, fine. At the rate we're going, though, if we're not careful, we will implode from the inside because we're not doing all the things we need to do now.
We're spending and not educating. We don't need more spending on education. We're spending too much, and kids are not getting educated. We need more on-the-job training. Unfortunately, we have too many kids going to college on government grants. It's bid up the price into the stratosphere, and we have all these kids graduating with huge mortgages and no houses and no marketable skills.
I'm saddened by those comments.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm saddened by what those programs have done to our young people.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. I yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
The artificially low rates that we're working with today. Any type of an idea or a scenario, what could happen when these rates that are being kept artificially low, and we know for the next, at least until the election, there's going to be a low prime rate. But when it rises to what it should be, market value, the effect that it's going to have on businesses.
Well, I mean, the problem, the artificially low interest rates right now are one of the main problems that the economy has, and I think we're pursuing those rates to prop up insolvent banks, to necessitate the government bubble, the borrowing from the Federal Government. And when interest rates ultimately rise, all the banks that you guys bailed out, they're all going to fail again, because they're insolvent. They're only kept afloat by the cheap money from the Fed. Their portfolios are loaded up with low-yielding, long-term mortgages and government bonds. And when interest rates go up, the value of those assets will collapse. But they have to go up, because eventually the dollar will sink so much, prices will rise so much, nobody will lend us money. The dollar won't be the reserve currency. Right now it's kind of benefiting from the fact that there are problems in other parts of the world. But look at the price of gold. It's at $1,900 an ounce for a reason. Right? It's going up because of all the inflation that we're creating now and all the inflation that we're going to have to create in order to keep interest rates at these low levels. And the only way to solve our problems is to let interest rates go up. And they're going to go way up. And then what are we going to do? I mean, if we keep inflating this bubble, if we let the national debt get to $20 trillion and then rates go to 10 or 20%, what people are saying now is exactly what they said during the real estate bubble. People used to tell me, Peter, you're crazy. Real estate prices will never fall. Well, now we know what happened. People are now saying the same thing with interest rates. We don't have to worry because interest rates will never rise. They will stay low forever. They won't.
No, and you're right. The only thing we know for sure is they're not going to rise before the next election.
Well, we don't know that for sure. They're going to try everything they can to prevent it.
And the other thing that's going to happen is we print money that isn't backed by anything. Our lenders are going to say at some point, you're paying me back with money that isn't worth what I lent you.
We're destroying the value of our money, and that's why prices are rising. Oil prices aren't going up. In fact, Ron Paul pointed out in his last debate, you can buy a gallon of gasoline for a dime, as long as you have a dime that was minted before 1965. It's because our money is being debased by the Federal Reserve, and that's what's happening. Prices aren't going anywhere. The value of our money is declining, and it's going to lose a lot more value in a very short period of time if we continue these policies.
And the President's new plan, there's a $4,000 incentive for hiring people who have been unemployed for long periods of time. For somebody like yourself who's an employer, and somebody who, like myself, who is an employer, who interviews people, are we picking winners and losers as to who it is we're going to hire?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. In fact, this is another example of things that are going to backfire. The government is proposing a plan to make it illegal for employers to discriminate against people who have been unemployed for more than 6 months. The effect of this is going to be is nobody is going to interview anybody who's been unemployed for more than 6 months because they don't want to risk a lawsuit. All this plan is going to do is going to mean if somebody was going to hire somebody anyway, they'll try to hire somebody they'll try to interview people who have been unemployed for about 5 months so they can start them at the 6 months so they can get the tax credit. But it's simply going to shift jobs away from people who are newly unemployed or long-term unemployed to people who have been unemployed for a specific period of time. I think the most it's going to do is influence minimum wage, because basically I said earlier that we should abolish the minimum wage. What that $4,000 tax credit does is temporarily substantially reduce the minimum wage for a 6-month period of time. So I think on the margin you'll create some minimum wage type jobs on a temporary basis, but it's not going to be any kind of great stimulus. And as I said, the deficits that we will generate to finance the tax cuts will destroy more jobs than those tax cuts create.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I now recognize Mr. Kucinich.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schiff, you've made a very strong case about cutting government spending. Does that include the Pentagon and ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan?
It absolutely includes that. Okay. In fact, I would put that high on the agenda.
I've just got a few. Thank you very much.
I just want to sort of pick up where Mr. Kucinich left off, and that is with regards to these economic theories and what works and what doesn't work. Professor Taylor, if you wanted to finish up, and then we would maybe just move down the panel. There seems to be disagreement, and I'd like to hear your perspectives as what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I wanted to point out, Mr. Kucinich, unfortunately he left, but he made the point that prior stimuluses had enjoyed bipartisan support. Well, they didn't enjoy my support. I opposed them at the time. All of the efforts by government in the past to artificially stimulate the economy have failed. They have worsened the problem. The recession is actually part of the cure. The recession needs to be allowed to run its course. The reason we're never going to have a real recovery is because the government won't let us have a real recession. We have serious economic imbalances that I mentioned. We have an economy that is based on spending borrowed money. That can't be. Economies have to be based on savings and investing and production. We're trying to run an economy upside down. And in order to maintain it, we have to keep interest rates to zero. We have to run these huge imbalances. We have to import all these goods that we don't produce. We have to borrow from the rest of the world. We have to allow the restructuring to take place. And until that happens, until we allow that to happen, we're not going to create jobs. We're not going to have any real economic growth. We can't just keep repeating the mistakes. But I know, and this is a political body, it is very difficult for politicians to level with the American public about how severe these problems are and how they are the consequence of years and years of mistakes made by Congress and by the Federal Reserve. There is a free market cure. It will work if the government gets out of the way and lets it happen. It's going to be painful. Just like anyone who has a drug habit, they check into rehab, they will come out better. But it's not going to work if every time they feel the withdrawal symptoms, they take another shot of heroin, because that's what these stimuluses are. It's a shot of monetary or fiscal heroin, and it's not going to work, and it only means that the eventual withdrawal is that much more painful because we got that much more drugs in the system that have to come out.
Thank you very much.
And I guess I'll ask a closing question because it's rhetorical, but it's important, I think, to the way I think, and perhaps your comments will help everyone. How many of you out of 5 believe Henry Ford did a service to America in automating and increasing the productivity at Ford plants during his tenure in the Model T and Model A?
He certainly did.
One of the things we can all agree on. Isn't that part of the challenge we face today, is if you can produce a better product for less, which also includes less labor, that's how you end up being a world-class creator of jobs? Isn't that the principle that for some reason stimulus, simply adding jobs by paying for them, does the exact opposite of less labor perhaps, but world-class labor that produces a better product for less? Mr. Schiff.
Absolutely. In fact, to point out, Henry Ford was famous for paying his workers $5 a day.
Highest in the world at the time.
Yeah, but that was 1.25 ounces of gold, which at today's exchange rate is $2,500 a week. So Ford's workers were making $2,500 a week, the equivalent. They were paying no federal income taxes and no payroll taxes. There was no minimum wage, and there were no unions. We paid the highest wages in the world, yet we produced the best quality, least expensive products. How was that possible? That was because we had the smallest government. We had minimal regulations, low taxes. And if we want to recreate American industry, we have to recreate that environment. We have to allow businesses to grow and prosper, and we have to remove all the roadblocks and the impediments that Congress has placed in their path over the years.
Dr. Boucher, you're sort of surrounded here, so I'll give you the last word.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm glad that Mr. Schiff brought up the $5 a day. That was an important point. The reason that Henry Ford did that, of course, was to reduce turnover and to keep highly skilled workers. So that certainly tells you something, and it'd be great to see more employers taking that high road strategy today that we don't see enough here in America.
Thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Issa. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for coming here today and taking time out of your busy schedules. We appreciate that very much. And at this time, this hearing stands adjourned.